Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am so thrilled that so many of you chose to spend your Thursday evening talking about the arts. You all know the power of art to change lives, to save lives, to inspire change, and to create communities. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But you are unique in this case. Today, we live in a society in which arts and cultural programming are consistently cut from school curricula. Art is seen as a luxury. Performance institutions struggle financially, and yet we know that a world devoid of the arts is a less vibrant, less meaningful, less diverse place, because the arts open our minds and hearts to the experiences of others and bring us back to the roots of our own culture and ethnic experience. Music, for instance, has changed my world. You're probably wondering who I am. I'm Talia Lefkowitz, and I sit on the board of Zamir, an organization that brings together thousands of singers, choral enthusiasts, conductors, scholars, and ensembles annually, all in celebration of Jewish choral music. I've been part of the Zamir community since I was in 7th grade, when I began singing with Zamir and first met Maestro Mati Lazar, one of our panelists today. Singing is the way that I celebrate my Jewishness. When I sing on my own or in harmony with others, I feel connected. For me, the artistic vehicle is music. For others, it's theater, art, literature, dance, poetry. Zamir has found a unique way to unite serious choral music with a love for Jewish heritage and culture. It has found a way to foster deep and enduring Jewish peoplehood through song. Why then, if their work can be so transformative for young Jews like myself, is it an ongoing struggle to raise money for this worthy institution? Zamir is not alone. Museums are in crisis. Artists are in crisis. Writers are in crisis. The arts are in crisis. And the Jewish community is in urgent need of the arts. In my day job, I'm a philanthropy advisor. I work with families and help them give away their money to nonprofit organizations. So I join you today wearing not only my Zamir hat, but as a philanthropy professional. It is my hope that we will come away from this conversation with a better understanding of the value of Jewish arts programming, the obstacles facing fundraising in this space, and what we can do moving forward to make arts a greater priority for the Jewish community in general. Before we dive into this conversation, I'd like to welcome and thank our panelists, Joni, Lou, and Mati, for being here. They come to us with tremendous depth of experience in the arts and philanthropy. Joni Blinderman is Executive Director of the Covenant Foundation, a grant-making program of Crown Family Philanthropies supporting Jewish education-related nonprofit organizations. I've known Joni personally for a number of years. My husband and her son have been friends since pre-K. Lou Cove is the founder of Canvas, a collaborative fund to elevate the ecosystem of Jewish arts and culture in North America through strategic and coordinated giving and education. I met Lou 2 years ago in 2020 when he was just launching Canvas. And finally, Mati Lazar is the founder and director of the Zamir Choral Foundation, an organization that promotes choral music as a vehicle to inspire Jewish life, literacy, community, and connection to Israel. I've known Mati since I was 12 years old, and I first started singing with Zamir, the ensemble that you listened to as you entered this Zoom call. He has been my mentor and maestro, and I'm very grateful to call him my friend. We'll leave time at the end for Q&A. We ask that you please direct your questions to the chat below. In the chat window, you can toggle to whom you send your message to, so be sure to share your messages directly with the participant that's labeled Q&A. And also make sure that you're muted for the duration of this discussion so as not to confuse our panelists. That's enough housekeeping from me. I'd love to start this conversation with a question to all three of you. What inspired you to get involved in this work? Joni, let's start with you.
Great, thank you. It's a dual answer question. One is about what inspired me to get into philanthropy, and the other, why I care so deeply about the arts. The first is I was just lucky to get involved in philanthropy. Harleen Appelman 15 years ago said, I think we'd make a great pair. Let's start heading up the Covenant Foundation, and that's what happened. What I enjoy very much, or what I find important about the work that I've been able to do in philanthropy, and I had done prior work in philanthropy in the 90s as well, is that you have a great perch. You have a sort of 30,000 foot up look at what is happening across the country, across North America, in the case of the Covenant Foundation, see what people are dreaming about, what's keeping them up at night, what they're inspired to do, what gets them up every day. And in the field of Jewish education, we have no lack of extraordinarily talented human beings devoting their life to Jewish education in the Jewish community. And so that inspires me every day. And that is what inspires me to get up every day and do the work that I'm able to do. In terms of the arts, the foundation has been interested since the beginning in the world of Jewish arts, and Harleen and I, and now I am continuing that legacy. The arts, using the arts as a lens through which we see much of the world and much of the opportunities of Jewish education and education in general, is why we persist year after year in concentrating some of our efforts in that arena. I'll say more later.
Lou, what about you?
Thanks, Talia. So great to be here. Happy and honored to be in the company of this amazing group. For me, I've always been interested in the arts. I mean, from the earliest part of my life. But I grew up in a really pretty, what I would describe as a hyper-assimilated Jewish home. And, I lived on the Upper West Side of New York, and being Jewish meant like getting the New York Times and going to Zabar's to get bagels and lox. Like that was my experience of it. And it wasn't until much later in my life that, and I spent the first 10 years of my career in journalism, actually, in writing, editing. And it wasn't until about 10 years into my career that I walked into the National Yiddish Book Center. And for those that haven't been there, it sounds like it might be this kind of dusty closet with a couple of survivors putting books on shelves, but it's actually a 50,000 square foot facility with just an education center and 2 theaters and a young and really ambitious team. And I was so taken with this literature, and much of which came about between the mid 19th and the mid 20th century, and represented an incredible outpouring of the Jewish people. And it wasn't just literature; it was music, and it was poetry, and theater, and film. And I thought, gee, if someone had shared this with me when I was young, I might have felt a stronger sense of connection to my identity, to what I was inheriting. It became an incredibly important portal for me, that literature, not in Yiddish, but in translation. And I ended up becoming the vice president of the book center and was there for 7 years. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. And during that time, I realized just how powerful the potential of arts and culture was for all of us to connect more closely with our own identities, but also for others to understand us and for cross-cultural connection to take place.
Mati, how did you get inspired to join this work?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with all of you having this very, very important and long overdue conversation. My story is a little bit the opposite of Lou's. I grew up in a family which valued being Jewish, which valued music, and which loved combining the two. So I was brought up listening to Schubert and Mozart and Mendelssohn and Moshe Koussevitzky and Sid Caesar, et cetera, et cetera. And I was able to really glean from personal experience just how moving it was to be singing together at home, to be singing together in a synagogue situation or in a secular world, to be singing, to be playing together, and how it inspired me in a very deep, deep way, in a very kind of unconscious way, to express myself both Jewishly and musically. For me, there was no distinction. They were happening at the same time, and only later on, when my cognitive abilities really developed, was I able to parse out the difference and then reconnect them again. And because I was a teenage singer in the Mossad choral group, I realized just how powerful this could be for other people. And I took it upon myself to really deliver a platform and create opportunities for other people, teenagers and adults, in a multi-generational way to experience that unique and almost creating an epiphany for the people who really sing choral music together, because you're breathing together, you're singing text, both parts of your brain are thinking, are operating at the same time. And it's a consuming and really elevating experience. And for the moment, there is nobody except the us. And I wanted to share that and promote that, especially leading to Jewish identity.
Well, now that we're all warmed up, I have a few questions that I want to direct to each of you individually. So Joni, you mentioned through your work at the Covenant Foundation, focusing on the arts. I'm curious, you could focus on any number of program areas. So why specifically the arts?
So the Covenant Foundation focuses on many, many things, right? And the way we do it is that we're receiving over the transom letters of inquiry. Anybody, anywhere anybody, anywhere in North America doing Jewish education can apply for a Covenant grant. And that's been a central tenet of the Covenant Foundation's processes and orientation and philosophy. Anybody, anywhere can apply. And we've held very tight to that since the beginning of our work 30 years ago, when the Covenant Foundation was founded by Susan Crown and Barbara Goodman Manilow. The interest in the arts, I think, just permeated the board at the time, the family, and then of course the staff, and we've continued that way over the course of the life of the foundation. What I think is that our interests have been in innovation in Jewish education, right? That's our mission, to promote excellence and innovation in Jewish education. The arts and artists are generally people who are innovative, cutting edge, if you will, thinking over the horizon, looking at things in very different ways than many other people do. And so when I think that we received from the get-go, from 30 years ago, we began receiving letters of inquiry from, people involved in the arts. So it may, in a way, have had an outsized impact on the funding of the foundation, because that's among many other things, but certainly that's how the arts were showing themselves. We were receiving these things and we were responding. We're responding to the needs of the field, and that's how people were showing themselves. So that's what I would say there. In terms of our interests, yeah, it's hard not to love the arts, depending on how you grow up or what you're doing or how you see students responding, whether they're very, very young children or they're elderly. The arts, studio arts, music, theater arts, people are responding. They feel it in their kishkas in ways that sometimes words just don't make it. And in a time like this, especially with what we've been through recently, words just sometimes don't make it, but the arts do. The arts give you words. They give you an opportunity to feel it and make your way through it. That's what I would say.
You mentioned responding to the community, and Lou, I feel like you've really done that. You founded Canvas in March of 2020 to support and promote the Jewish arts world. You were responding to a need, and I'm curious why that need arose then, kind of what's unique about the last few years.
Well, I guess what I would say is that then really started in 2013, because 2013, two really kind of catalytic events took place simultaneously, at least for me. The first was the release of the Pew study of the American Jewish community. And for those of you that are familiar with it, it was very disruptive to the philanthropic community. I was on the board of the Grinspoon Foundation at the time, spending a lot of time at Jewish Funders Network and with other funders. And there was a lot of alarm that, gee, we've invested millions and millions, billions of dollars, and things aren't working. The community is somehow shrinking, and this is an emergency. I didn't quite read it the same way, because I saw the statistic in there that said 94% of Jews are proud of who they are. And I think part of the answer was, maybe they just don't like everything that you're giving them. And maybe we need to just take a closer look at the quality, the creativity, the innovation, to Joni's point, and see if we can do better. Now, 2 weeks after, I think it was approximately 2 weeks after that survey came out, the Foundation for Jewish Culture announced that they would be closing their doors. And I didn't hear a peep from the philanthropic community. There was no, now we could talk about whether or not the Foundation for Jewish Culture needed to close. And there were reasons why it really, couldn't survive past that point. But we need a foundation for Jewish culture. We need many foundations for Jewish culture in order for it to thrive. And so at that point, I just said, we've got to do something here. We've got to at least examine why this is taking place. And Foundation for Jewish Culture wasn't the only thing that was slipping at that point. I mean, we were seeing a lot of other organizations like JDub and other projects just kind of go by the wayside, things that people loved and had funded, but suddenly, people got fickle, moved away, whatever. And there simply wasn't an infrastructure to support Jewish arts and culture as there had been in earlier times. And so we began, and when I say we, myself, Rachel Levin and Shana Triebwasser at Righteous Persons Foundation, which is Steven Spielberg's Jewish foundation, and Jewish Funders Network began a survey of funders around the country to ask, what are the barriers to entry here? Why do you fund Jewish arts and culture? If so, to what extent? And if you don't, why not? And we published a report on that. We then surveyed the field, talking to practitioners, talking to people running arts organizations, and said, what is it that you need? Where are the pressure points? How can the philanthropic community be helpful to you? And out of all of that, and that was a number of years of work and a lot of conversations, ultimately, we were able to come to a couple of clear conclusions. We need coordinated and we need strategic funding. And we need people to get together around a single table and start to really do things together, because it's the only way we're going to be able to lift up the field. And so with Canvas starting in 2020, we began with 5 major foundations as partners. We've grown to 7, numerous other funders that are supporting Canvas in other ways. And it's just the beginning, but at this point we're,
Can you
we're putting about
what Canvas does?
Sure. Yeah, so we distribute at this point about $1 million each year into the field. And I mean, I'm saying each year, it's 2 years in, but it's growing fairly rapidly. But in addition to doing the grant making, we're also doing a lot of field building. So we're bringing our grantees together, we're doing capacity building, we're helping to train them in professional areas where they may be lacking. When COVID began, we were talking about scenario planning and bringing in special folks to help them understand how to operate in that kind of environment, and most importantly, teaching them how to fundraise and teaching them how to be, and teaching them also how to coordinate with one another. And I should say we have 3 kind of areas of focus that we invest in. So we do not make grants to individual artists or individual projects, but instead we make grants that we hope will strengthen the backbone of the field. So we support networks. These are networks of artists or networks of arts organizations like the Council of American Jewish Museums or the Jewish Book Council, Reboot, Asylum Arts, LABA, et cetera. There are 14 of them now. We support media coverage of the field so that people know when there's great work going on out there, and we support distribution channels. So the ways in which we, the audience, can discover the work and interact with it. Al regalachas, in a nutshell, that's what we do.
Mati, you are one of those grantees in the field that Lou was referring to. You joined the Mossad Choral Group, which then later became the Zamir Choral in the mid-60s, and then you became the director in the early 70s. And you transformed a single choir into a foundation with many different programs that promote Jewish identity, literacy through Jewish choral singing. I'm curious what you've seen and learned, and what choices did you have to make along the way that could be instructive to us in this conversation?
Well, I'd have to say that it's always been our goal and my goal to provide experiences and moments and opportunities that are meaningful, joyful, cathartic, inspiring, educational, and fun, using music, of course. And when Zamir first was beginning its career as a choir, we would be singing mostly folk repertoire. And eventually we spread our wings and developed a larger repertoire, a broader repertoire for a more sophisticated audience. But a choir should not just be a choir alone. And however wonderful the experience is of singing in a choir and of singing in front of an audience, there's a bond between the singers and the conductor. There's a bond between the audience and the singers and the performers. But it's better to have more choirs. And the community that I envisioned was filling a space of loneliness. People would say often, my friends would say, we should get together, but no one was ever doing it. So I created the North American Jewish Choral Festival, which is a pluralistic and very importantly now trans-political community where people of all stripes really across the spectrum sing together in a very specific way. They sing together in choirs that they bring and they come with. And also we set up choirs that are facilitating entry points for all levels. So we have professional singers, we have people who really are agnostic singers. They don't know if they can sing or they can't sing. But it's an opportunity for everyone to leave behind all the things that divide us in today's society, especially today in America and Israel, and to be able to really get the feeling of unity. So that was the first thing that I was going to really bring to the table, I thought. It's a 5-day event too, so people really get a chance to wake up together and go to sleep together and hang out at all hours, and that really is the defining element of being in a community. Mm-hmm. And the next challenge that I think I faced and that we faced was the future. And the way to really redeem the future and ensure the future is, of course, to talk to the next generation. And so I and my team created Zamir, which is the International Jewish Teen Choir, 40 chapters now across the United States and Israel, singing the same repertoire, learning through our educational notes exactly what the context and the text is all about, and combining that with the music, and getting youthful exuberance back into the picture, and really developing the next generation, not only of singers for individual choirs, but professional Jewish musicians, cantors, rabbis who love to sing, a very significant component in the furtherance of our people, and really begin leadership. So that's really what's important about the Zamir program. And the surprising element that occurred was once we had all these teen singers, the whole idea of a multi-generational choir appeared. And I never really realized until I put together adults and teenagers on the stage in Carnegie Hall, actually with Elie Wiesel singing a solo and conducting, an astounding moment where the unity was palpable. And people began to feel the generational pull, a true ledor vador from generation to generation, with no one thinking about anything except being together and really feeling that unity which we're so desperate to feel. And the final challenge really was trying to create, as Joni was mentioning, and then Lou, you followed up on the cutting edge. So there's a balance between legacy and cutting edge and everything in the middle. And that's really the Haya, the Hove, and the Yihye, the past, the present, and the future, that needs to really be unified, where we are cognizant of the past, where we are confident in the present, and are training for the future. Right. And those are the items that I felt there was a need in the community, in my Jewish community, in that part of the Jewish community that I swim in. And I know how powerful music is, and I see it every day. And if you were here at the beginning, you heard and saw 400 teenagers singing their hearts out and really expressing their love of being Jewish and music together.
I guess if we all understand the value of arts and the role it can play in Judaism, I'm just curious why there's this constant struggle to continuously fundraise in this space. And I think that the reason is because, one, I think it's really difficult to measure impact in this space. I also think that the arts are not so easily accessible to all. And I also think that funding the arts can kind of be perceived as, self-serving You know, it's very easy to raise money for education and healthcare. For the arts, it's a little bit more difficult. So Joni, as someone who deals with this every day, I'm curious how you're measuring impact. And as Maki mentioned, you know, how are you factoring in that relationship between the cutting edge and tradition as well?
I think that there are a lot of questions in that question.
Mhm.
So thank you, Talia. um, Let me start with something that happens many weeks. I get calls all the time. You know, people are curious about what we're funding and what our interests in, what are we interested in, what are our priorities, and so on. And it's not so much, as I expressed earlier, not so much what we're interested in. It's what are you thinking about and what are you dreaming about? I get calls more often from folks working in the arts just asking me, they're not even pitching me something. They just want to know, do I know anybody, a donor, another philanthropy, you know, local, national, whatever. They just cannot raise money for their arts institutions. And I just had one conversation well, it must be like 4 hours ago now. Today, my heart was breaking. They do incredibly important work, beautiful work in the Washington, D.C. area. They can't find money. They just can't find money. You know, they eke it out. So Lou, aside from me, that would be a call to you also. I know you agree. In terms of legacy and sort of cutting edge, our watchword, our mission is innovation in Jewish education. So obviously we're looking forward into innovation, unique, et cetera, that kind of language. But I just think that we carry with us our traditions. We carry them, we hold them, we use them, whether we're funding in the arts or people creating programs in the arts or in many other you know, content or field areas of the field. So it's not so much, I don't think about legacy institutions. If there's something really unique happening in a legacy institution, we're going to look at it and we're going to have our peer reviewers look at it and determine whether they think this is something that we should move forward with and so on through our process. So legacy institutions doesn't make any difference. You could have started your organization a year ago. You could have started it 100 years ago. It makes no difference to us in terms of tradition and content, the richness of our own history. That's with us all the time, and most assuredly with us in most everything that we fund. I don't know if I got to everything you asked, Talia, but that's kind
You did great.
of where I ended up.
Lou, I'm curious how you think we can make the arts a bit more accessible to those without an arts background. And is there an example that you can share of a space where you've seen this done really well?
Sure. I mean, I think, first of all, I just want to address the first point about, you know, fundraising for the arts. And, you know, there's this perception of like, many of the things that you described, education, medical, et cetera, like these are need to have, art is nice to have. I just want to kind of address that for a second, because I think it's just so important for us. And I'd ask everyone to just think about what's just happened over the past couple of years during the pandemic. And particularly when the lockdowns began and we were all stuck at home, like, what did you do? You started reading books and watching films and listening to music, and you were trying to make sense of a really difficult time. We all were. And we all leaned so heavily on artists and on the artistic community to support us during that time, to help us process what was going on, or to help just lift our spirits at a time where we were so low. And at that very same time, the arts field was absolutely decimated economically. And I don't know if people really understand just how bad it was, but just on a percentage basis, the arts field had lost more jobs by a factor of by 100% more than the next largest industry that lost jobs during the crisis, particularly during the beginning. So during COVID, 2.3 million jobs lost in the arts field. $74 billion in average monthly earnings evaporated. 30% of all creative occupations went away. 50% of all fine arts and performing arts jobs were cut. And when you think about that, particularly in the fine and performing arts, that was 1.4 million jobs, $42.5 billion in sales. This wasn't an arts crisis. This was an economic crisis, a spiritual crisis, a community crisis. So, and I think it was, for me, just so instructive and a way to communicate to everyone in a moment where we were all relying on, and we were doing these Zooms and we're asking artists and musicians and authors to come and speak and perform for us. So many were being asked to do it for free, for the exposure. It's simply not tenable, but it's also absolutely essential to who we are and our ability to survive. So I don't think it's a nice to have. I think it's a need to have. And sorry, didn't mean to get on the soapbox about that, but I just wanted to address that piece. Oh, and you were asking about a way into the arts. Yeah. I think the example I would give, and I think it touches on this legacy innovation piece too, is a piece of work that I am very proud of that we worked on 10 years ago when I was executive director of Reboot, called Sukkah City. This was an international architecture competition to reimagine the sukkah. We had hundreds of entries from real designers and architects all over the globe. 10 were selected. Only half of them were designed by artists or designers who were Jewish, but all of them met halachic restrictions. They all were halachically sound. And for those of you that saw it and saw this exhibition in Union Square Park in New York and saw Mike Bloomberg come and announce the People's Choice of Sukkah for New York City, you saw an art exhibition that relied heavily on the legacy that we've all inherited, but looked nothing like what we're used to seeing. And it really sparked imagination and it really got people thinking. And I think people who don't consider themselves fans of architecture or design were absolutely smitten. And one thing that I really saw sitting in Union Square Park and watching these people come through, we had 175,000 people come to that event over a 2-day period. And what I saw was people who were not Jewish turning to their friends who were Jewish and saying, this is really amazing. Why do you all do it this way? And the Jews were saying, I actually don't know, but I'm gonna find out because this is really fascinating to me. So back to my point about the Yiddish Book Center and my point of entry, when something is creative, when something really touches people in that way, it's an incredible way in. I think it needs to be at the level though. It requires excellence and relevance in order to really reach people. And I think ultimately, if you don't have that, Zamir has that, if you don't have that, then people aren't going to settle for it. Particularly, they won't settle for art and culture that is somehow less than simply because it's Jewish. It's got to be at the level.
Monty, you're one of those grantees that probably calls Joni with all your questions. I'm curious what has worked for you and what hasn't in the way that you pitch Zamir to philanthropists. How do you get people interested in this space?
Well, I will answer that, but first I want to thank Lou for his compliment and highlight the importance of excellence. And when we talk about art, I think one of the reasons that people have problems supporting the arts is because they've been trained or mistrained to think of art for art's sake. And that's true. And we know that the Levites had no portion of the land, and they kind of relied on, I don't want to call Master a handout, but it is, it's part of the tradition where Mozart, was buried in a pauper's grave. So it's not a unique situation right now. But there are ways in which the uninitiated can be trained. For example, we remember the old days, I think some of us on this call, where there was such a thing called music appreciation and art appreciation. And we would go into class and people who had zero interest would all of a sudden get a spark of light, a spark of of interest and go to the museum and go to a concert. They had to pass the class, but it stayed with them. And in the my Zamir world, we have Hazamir teens who they like to sing in the shower, and they don't read music and they don't play an instrument, but they love excellence. They love being able to sing by now difficult music, as you heard in the early clip. They love singing, they love the discipline, they love making it better. So I think that can be trained. And at the Choral Festival I was mentioning to you too, we have all these levels of choirs. People start at the beginning and then they work their way up. It's an eternal quest for self-improvement. And it's better for society, and it's better, of course, for us. So now I'm going to answer your question. And I really actually haven't ever really spoken to Joni before. So, but maybe I will now.
Well, just join the gang. It's okay. I welcome it.
I think the main challenge, there are three challenges I find. The first challenge is finding a content that is deep and wide and meaningful, that can really appeal to a lot of people, but at a high standard. Now, that is no small charge. And if you can't find it, you have to create it or find people to create it, or in the case of the Sukkah, recreate it, which is another level of a Jewish kind of genius to interpret whatever has come in the past. The second is to find, and it is a challenge, is to find a community of partners, people who are willing to work with you, organizations who are willing to work with you. I hope that's going to be a byproduct of this conversation, that more organizations will be working together for our great common goal. It hasn't really been tried to this level, but I hope that we will be able to succeed. And sometimes it's important, and for example, for Zamir, I was able to create a continuum of audience, participants, and professionals. And I think that's one of the things I learned the way, trying to have this pipeline of interest, of training, of not self-congratulations, but self-affirmation and group affirmation. And finally, of course, the challenge with the donors is to find a donor, a supporter, who believes in your mission, who believes in with passion, who believes that your goal is correct, and understands, as we've been saying, the incredible power of art and culture. And it's a tremendous power. The power of art and culture to allow us to express ourselves, all parts of ourselves. You know, personal integration is a big thing. Being able to integrate your Jewish self with all the other individual aspects of your personality. And art can help you do that, and can help you do it with other people. So expressing yourself, expressing your Jewishness, maintaining your identity, expanding your identity and your knowledge base. People need to find donors and sponsors who believe that that is the way.
We are getting a ton of questions from our listeners. So I'd like to give them a chance to ask you their questions. This one's directed towards you, Lou. From Rabbi Danny Freelander. He asks, what's the best way to grow the Jewish arts? Is it supporting group settings or individual artists?
It's a great question, and it's something where, we ask ourselves all the time. In our case, we've chosen, I mentioned, to invest and invest pretty heavily in networks of Jewish artists and of Jewish arts professionals. And the reason that we chose to do that was because we felt like if we could bring them together, if we could provide opportunities for them to find one another, if we could help support the organizing entities that would give them access to Jewish education and Jewish educators, give them access and ideas for career development, find one another and begin to cross-pollinate ideas, collaborate on projects together. Those are things that happen within these cultural networks. And for my money, that's a pretty good investment because it's leveraged. At this point, we are making grants to 14 different Jewish arts and culture networks. I use the word network pretty broadly. It just means it's a group of people that come together with some kind of consistency, and where there's some specific programming that it could be grants to the artists to help them do their own projects or to collaborate together. It provides some kind of basis of Jewish education for them, perhaps gives them access to the broader Jewish community. Those things, at this point, those networks represent about 3,000 individual professional Jewish creatives. So one may be working on something that you don't love, and there are 2,999 others that are doing amazing creative projects. But I think the idea of bringing them together, giving them the opportunity to create together and to find a community, that's so important, because I have to say, if you are an author, you're a visual artist, you're a dancer, whatever it is, you're a singer. If you've made a decision you really want to explore your Jewish identity in your creativity, it's not necessarily a great career move. It's not necessarily the way to really blow up. And so when you find yourself in the company of many others who are also pursuing the same thing, the viability of that notion gets stronger. I'll say one other thing about trying to create an environment for artists like that, and it has to do with PJ Library. PJ Library, a project that I've worked on for many years, since the beginning, really. It now distributes Jewish children's stories to over 600,000 families around the globe. Now, that's a beautiful mitzvah in and of itself, but what it also means is that there's a huge market for new children's literature. And that means new artists, new authors, new editors, new illustrators who never thought about pursuing a Jewish story are suddenly really interested because there is a market. So I think we have to think very practically about what are the forces and what are the circumstances that need to exist in order to make a really healthy ecosystem for Jewish arts and culture to thrive. Having a healthy market, having good networks where you can find each other, having good distribution channels like a PJ Library where those can get to broader audiences. That's our strategy in terms of trying to beef up the Jewish arts and culture space.
Thanks, Lou. Joni, I feel like this next question's for you. It happens to come from my mom. Innovation is a really positive word and a worthy mission, but it also relegates those who are in the traditional arts to a difficult place in terms of fundraising. How do we fundraise for a more traditional art form? Is there no room in our culture for excellence in performance of classical music, art, dance, etc.? If we're constantly pushing the envelope in the pursuit of innovation, what do we leave behind?
Yeah, thank you, Ilana, for that question. I can answer it very much about the Covenant Foundation. I have probably other thoughts as well. When I think of innovation, again, it doesn't matter where it's coming from. In other words, whether it's any kind of Jewish, in our case, any kind of Jewish musical organization that's doing Jewish music or Jewish art or Jewish theater, or whatever it happens to be. And again, how old it is, how long it's been around, what they're doing makes no difference. For us, the innovation actually is around the Jewish education, what form they want it to take. That's the innovation. So our mission, this is how we were founded, our mission really is to look for something, a new spin on an old idea or a new idea. So that for us, it doesn't matter where it's coming from. That's not the innovation. That's not, it needs to be new, it needs to be young, it needs to be something. That really isn't at all how I think about what's important in the world of art and Jewish education and the way that the foundation thinks about it. So the innovation is really the new spin on an old idea, or as I said, a new idea around Jewish education. What are we doing with the art to bring it to whatever population somebody has in mind that will, enervate, that will bring new energy into the system, new energy into the community? That So I don't see it that way. I see it as the world keeps evolving, new ideas spread. And it doesn't matter to me, nor do I think it should matter to anyone, how long it's been around, that it's older music, that it's traditional something. That's not what I find important. How are you bringing it to some population, to a younger population, to appreciate it, to get engaged in it? It's the way that Mati, really, it's the way that Mati was talking about how you bring people together, how you create unity, how you engage people with their identity, with their history, with their traditions. How do you get them to touch it, to hold it, to love it? That's what the animating factor is for us at the foundation. Not that it's an old piece of music. What do we want to know from that about? It's not about that at all. Great. That a new generation could be affected by something that was written, 500 years ago. That's amazing. That's amazing. So again, it's that little tweak on how are we bringing it to whatever the population is. I don't care if they're 80 plus or they're 3 months old. It's, with their families. It's very much about just energizing and the population. So that I don't see it as an issue, I guess is the way I would put it. I think that's what I have to say about it. If I did think that, we would leave every tradition behind us. Where would we be? Who would we be? What is our community if you leave it all behind? You can't possibly do it. We have such a rich legacy filled with joy and love and community. Yeah, that would be a waste of my time. I'd be doing something else, most assuredly.
Mati, this question is for you. It writes, you spoke about the next generation leaders. Is there an example of a young person who then became a leader or creator that you can point to?
Well, and the many years of the Zamir organization, there are many rabbis and cantors who've come through and used the performance aspect of Zamir to propel their personalities, which is always a great thing. But there's more to it than that. The next generation is really where we're training. We have a few young singers and composers who came out of the Hazimir experience and now are, one of them is actually Francine Sokol's son, who is now being mentored by one of the great baritones at the Met. And we have a young singer who is a composer, one of the few people who is a joint student at Harvard and New England Conservatory, who we commissioned a piece for. He just wrote a piece about David Ben-Gurion's famous speech in 1956, by Negev Yibachein. In the Negev, the people of Israel will be tested as to whether they can meet the future. So having a 17-year-old young man who didn't know anything about Ben-Gurion, much less the challenges of the Negev, write a piece that then 400 teenagers would learn about the text of David Ben-Gurion and what it meant and what the history of the state of Israel was in the 1950s. That was a very impressive kind of thing to do. So those are two examples of what it is that we're trying to accomplish with the young people. And then we have now one of the most organic positive developments for Zamir is that of those many chapters of Hazamir that we have, 11 of them are the conductors of the chapters. We have 11 graduates of Hazamir who are now conducting Hazamir chapters, both here and in Israel. And that is, of course, very heartwarming, but is really shows the essential truth of getting people when they're young, educating them. Some of them were better musicians and not so talented on the Jewish side. Others were very knowledgeable Jewishly, but needed encouragement on the music side. It's a dialectic, and we're a dialectical people, and we know how to resolve that. And one of the great things is of the particularism universalism, an aspect that we haven't really talked about. But for me, that's one of the great aspects of our tradition. And the late, great Zichrono Livracha Elie Wiesel was the personification of particularism and universalism, and we surely need him now. But if we have a chance, and we commissioned a piece called Im'ena Nili Mili, which is Hillel's famous remark, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? And when we commissioned a piece, we teach the meaning of that tension. And to me, that's the tension that is a moving, if I can say a moving target in today's world. It changes from day to day, but that's the balance that we need to encourage young people to really examine in a personal way, in a political way, in a national way. I just did a run through of that piece, and everyone in the room was thinking, this is what the Ukrainians must be thinking right now. And of course, the Jewish people are always thinking that. So I think the next generation can produce great art that needs encouragement. And I'm very optimistic about it when we put ourselves together. And I love what you said, Joni, and I wish every funder felt exactly the same way that you do.
Thank you.
We're running out of time, so I'll pose my last question to all three of you. I feel like we've started something special here simply by gathering and having this conversation. So I'm wondering what you all think is next. How can we leverage this all together? I'll start with you, Lou.
Well, I think starting the conversation is the most important part. I mean, just getting people to get around a table, or in this case, our Hollywood Squares grid, but to begin to, talk about what the core issues are. And I think you've done a great job, Talia, just in terms of kind of highlighting what some of the key barriers to entry are here, and begun to kind of unpack that for everybody. These essential questions that get asked a lot, but don't always get answered, and certainly don't get answered in company where we can really kind of analyze it together and come up with some strategies together. So, in our case with Canvas, it's all about, as I said earlier, it's all about collaboration, coordination, and strategy. And I think that that's really important. I talked earlier about what our strategy is. Others on this with us this evening, may have a very different strategy. But what matters is that you recognize the importance of the work, and that you also give yourself time to experience it. I mean, I think for those of you that were here at the beginning and you got to see Zamir and in performance, I mean, whether or not that's your music, you kind of feel like that's your music when you see that. And it's so beautiful, and it's so at a level of excellence that you can't look away, but you have to have the opportunity to look. So I just want to invite everyone to look more closely. There is so much going on. I talked earlier about the Jewish cultural renaissance that happened in the mid-19th to the mid-20th century. I really believe there's another one taking place right now. There is just such a wealth of creativity, and it is way more imaginative and diverse and surprising than most folks realize. So I invite you to look really closely and to experience as much of Jewish arts and culture as you can.
Yeah, I'll comment on this as well. The Covenant Foundation does a lot of consultations, a lot of bringing, as Lou does, a lot of bringing of networks together, both of artists and others, and supporting them through our grants and other programs that we have. So we have some experience in this arena. It's part of our strategy as well to move upfield. It might be arts, it might be something else, forward. My experience has been that in a case like this, you brought so many wonderful people together, and thank you, Talia, and everyone else who participated in planning all of this, that if depending on what your priority is around this and those who you've planned this with, one is to talk as we have tonight and engage with others that are on the Zoom with us. And another is to determine which way you want to go. There may be multiple ways that you want to go. And what we've found is that follow up in terms of, it might be other funders, you know, that you're really trying to get the conversation to broaden with other funders. I mean, it's on my sleeve tonight because this conversation this afternoon with this wonderfully talented human being was just, I couldn't believe it. And it just piles on top of all these conversations that I have. So to bring other funders together in the room to further the conversation, to widen the conversation to a broader group of funders, I would think would be one next step that I would think would be important. I would be happy to participate and be helpful. There's just a dearth of funders out there who are picking up the mantle that Lou is, that I am, that others are. I am, the Covenant Foundation is, and others. And I would say that's one of the next moves that I would think would be very, very important.
Mati?
I would go to the famous statement of Na'aseh and Nishma, that we will do and we will hear, in reverse order. We need to hear more of these kind of conversations and gathering, and it's, you know, thrilling for me as someone who's been working in this field for a long time, way back in the days when no professional Jewish organization believed that art and culture could possibly be the source of inspiration for identity. And that goes a long way back. So it's thrilling to hear the conversation. I think it would be great if from your perches, Joni and Lou, you could spread the message that we've been hearing and you've been sharing today, that art is not just art. Art is a portal for the entry into Jewish peoplehood,
Yeah.
Whatever level is going to be achieved, and being able to actually do that. So it would be wonderful if we could get funders together and have them be spoken to by people who are their peers in a fundraising and in a funding way, and really get educated about the real value of art. People go to the symphony, they go to the opera, they go to museums. They know for that one brief moment it's there, and they're been transported. We need to rivet their attention, and I'm going to harken back, Lou, to what you were talking about in the pandemic. Of course, everyone needed the arts. There was nothing else that they could do. They reverted back to the default position of, if God can't help me and the country can't help me, then the great artists who are living and not living can help me. And how many people have been inspired by Beethoven or by my favorite composer, Salomone Rossi, or any other composer of any other tradition? The music is that prediscursive communicator that you were talking about before, Joni. And I think even when people appreciate it, they forget it very soon. And when I was participating in panels during the pandemic, and people said, "What's your greatest fear?" I said, "My greatest fear is that when the pandemic is over, people will have forgotten how desperately they needed what they lost and will go back to taking it for granted." And that, I fear, is really what happens after people hear a concert or go to hear a workshop. They remember it, and at the moment, I was advised when I was very young, the best time to ask someone for money is the day after Yom Kippur, because they don't want to lie to you at that point. So I think we've evolved beyond that. But that would be my hope, that we can really raise the level of communication and dedication of what the arts really mean to our people. It's a 4,000-year-old tradition.
Right.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists, Joni, Lou, Mati. Truly, thank you for taking the time to have this important conversation with us. Of course, thank you to all the rest of you for joining us. We hope to have many more taking note conversations like this one in the coming months. So look out for your email. My least favorite part of a Zoom gathering is seeing all of your faces disappear from my screen. So instead, I invite you to listen to my choir, Zamir No Dead, at the end of this Zoom call for a little dose of Jewish choral joy. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Talia.
Thanks, Talia. Thanks, Joni. Thanks, Lou.
Thank you.
Zamir
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.